appreciation does lead to a level of tolerance. And without tolerance, human beings just cannot live with each other.
Go for
Okay, this time the wild psychotherapists, John and Roland, we're going to talk about appreciation, which I'm not sure what that means, but we'll see as we go along.
it.
So off we go. Let's appreciate.
Hmm. You're asking me to go first.
Yeah, of course. I don't know
Do
what
I, do I look wild enough to go first?
you look pretty wild. Although I have to say, your beard is looking very well trimmed.
Oh, thank you.
Right. Very nice.
Okay, so yeah, appreciation. I often think about it as in a reflective way, like I check out in my body. Is there anything that I feel I missed today that I didn't appreciate enough or vocalize or make aware? Is there anything there that kind of haunts me that there are sort of micro signals that I picked up or I turned into something else that gave me some appreciation anxiety? Yeah. So it's
You're going to have to explain that a little more, John.
well, it's like I saw a client the other day. It was quite a tough session. Afterwards, I felt I missed something. I missed giving voice, appreciative voice to something, and contextualizing something in an appreciative way. I could tell that she went away with something, or I think she did. You could say I was using that in the service of myself, my therapeutic standards, and something was haunting me, something I hadn't paid attention to enough or appreciated enough. And I think I've got it. I think I understand now, and I'll mention it next time we meet. I thought about kind of contacting, but I'll leave it until next time.
Okay. The thing I was looking up appreciation just as a word, and it has a lot of different meanings, of course. But basically, it's kind of recognizing the value of something, recognizing it. I'm wondering about that in terms of like how that applies to therapy, because I'm not actually sure. I know that one of the things I do appreciate about clients and about human beings in general is the kind of creativity we have
Hmm.
in surviving and trying to thrive in a very difficult world and difficult situations.
Hmm.
And how, if you look at what looks like, you might say, a dysfunction, that you could see it as a very elegant solution to
Hmm.
a situation which was impossible at a certain period, but then it got stuck.
Hmm.
And that's kind of how I think of it. And I think sometimes that those adaptations that he's made to the situation and to the
Hmm.
situation are immensely creative. Not in the
Hmm.
sense of cognitively creative, but creative in the sense that I would never ever have come up with those ways of thinking or ways of responding to the situations. And therefore, it has to come from this kind of well of potential that we have in us.
There's something going on at quite a deep level
Mhm.
towards to do with survival and getting through things and not even necessarily understanding what your suffering is, but knowing that you somehow have to, well, not even knowing, instinctively trying to get through it. You see
Mm.
that with children quite a lot of just how they cope with adverse circumstances and how their defenses work to protect them in a way.
But also how resilient they are.
Mm,
My grandson's here at the moment, and basically, if you drop him, he bounces. I mean, he'll cry for a little while, and you just think about us at our age. If you drop us, we don't bounce.
mm.
We've lost some of that resilience.
Further,
When he gets hurt, or he's uncomfortable, or he's hungry, or whatever, he's about, what is he, 10 months at the moment? He just reaches up and you can see he has preferences about who he reaches up to. Uh, Sometimes he'll do me, sometimes his aunt, because we're all here together, sometimes his grandmother, sometimes his parents. And you could see that he's like creatively meeting his own needs and
Mm,
and trying to get a real sense of like well-being because when he does have
mm,
that, of course, he looks very happy. And I
mm.
suppose we're all doing that or have been.
I mean, the way you're talking about appreciation in terms of a responsiveness by the adults to, pick up the signals and process, be alongside the child in the process of working something through or learning from that. I
Hmm.
think it was Carl Rogers, but he talked about validation, acknowledgement, and but it's like a kind of appreciation.
Is that unconditional positive regard or is that the whole
Well,
package?
it's yeah, I think it's probably under the umbrella of that, but some of the child development people talk about that too, about acceptance, validation, and appreciation. I went through a phase of writing all my clients a letter after every session,
Whoa.
and they were kind of reflecting on the session, but very much full of appreciation of what they'd been through, what they were working with, shifts that had gone on, or stucknesses that were there, and just how much they were coping with that stuck place that they were in. And but the people told me at times that they kept those letters and brought them out to read them again and again. But it was time consuming.
Oh, it's tremendously time. Tell me about that because that's a very, how should I, very generous. And in
Mm,
fact, I was just thinking about appreciation and generosity as being somehow very overlapping. But that was
mm,
a very generous
mm,
thing to do. Time consuming. In some sense, you weren't being paid for it either because it's outside of the session. It shows the client that they're not forgotten. They haven't been erased from your mind where I think we've talked about this before,
mm,
where I feel as though so many of our clients were kind of erased from their parents' minds when they weren't around.
mm,
They didn't have that holding sense that I'm
mm,
being held mentally and physically, and that you are actually holding them. And not
mm,
only holding them, but holding them in a way where you're looking at their value, looking at the
mm,
fact that have some quality which is unique to them.
mm.
And that you're understanding their struggle and
Yeah,
appreciating their struggle. So kind
yeah.
of validating that.
And I learned a lot from it because it was also like a checking out with clients whether they felt that I got it, whether that reflected the session we had and that what their hopes and goals were and how
Mm.
we were getting on, what was better. So it was very sad, but people felt more than anything else really heard.
Mm.
Another aspect of appreciation, appreciating the unconscious, trying to hear what people are really telling me in the way or in terms of what they need and want from me and what they haven't had enough of in their lives, especially their early life. And a kind of recognition of what they've been through isn't who they are, it's what they've been through. And so that differentiation is quite powerful, really.
So how would you recognize what the unconscious is trying to communicate? What do you rely on? Is it a more intuitive sense? Are you looking for minor cues, little things? Are you looking at a holistic sense of the whole person?
Hmm. I think the unconscious is telling us things all the time in simply the way that people present, the way they talk, the issues that they bring, um, what their circumstances are, the lived life and the unlived life.
Hmm.
So it's about allowing yourself to be affected, allowing myself to be affected in a way that I can kind of hear and appreciate, what they've been through in their lives, in some ways what their ancestors have been through and how hard it was. Even people who've had a lot of abuse, they don't necessarily want the police and social work to descend on their families and to
Mm.
And you get a lot of, like in relation to sexual abuse, you get a lot of children retract it
Yeah,
because once they see the police come in, social work department come in, they have to go to the doctor, then they will quite often say, it was just I was just joking.
yeah.
So that in some ways they're saying, you're taking something, you're destroying my family, you're taking something out of my hands. I've been living with this. I don't want you to destroy my family. I want to protect my family, and I want to still love my dad. Yeah, I want it to stop, but I don't want everything to fall apart. A lot of the time, I think there's not an appreciation of the child's pace of things being acted upon.
Unless you actually understand the worldview, the experience of the child, you're almost certainly going to make it worse.
Mm,
And because a child does not live in the same world as an adult,
mm,
does not have the same kind of ways of thinking about things. And as you say, if because of me, my daddy went to prison, then of course it's my fault that the family fell apart.
mm,
And I should have done X, Y, Z. And that's how
mm,
a child will think because a child is the center of the universe, of their own small universe.
mm,
Therefore, everything that happens around them is really about them. I remember this very clearly. I kind of learned it from a client who, at the age of 2, had been behaving badly. Father was irritated with him. Then his father, that day or maybe the next day, had a heart attack and died.
mm,
And of course, it was very clear to that child that they'd attacked the father's heart
mm,
and that that's why he died.
mm,
And when you look at that way of thinking, you can say, well, it has its own logic.
mm.
It isn't adult logic.
No. But appreciation would be hearing that, knowing that, feeling that,
Hmm.
and finding a way to take that off the child.
Exactly, because nobody talked to the child about it. He was
Mm,
kept away from it all. He wasn't allowed to be involved in any way. And
mm,
of course, that's protecting the child in some ways, but also not realizing that the child needs certain amount of
mm.
information and contact in order to work through that kind of experience. Back
To
to the appreciation. The other thought I had about appreciation and the unconscious is that how do we teach people, clients, to appreciate their own unconscious? Because it seems to me that most people have very little relationship with their unconscious.
mm,
It's this thing that kind of exists kind of conceptually, but it isn't
mm,
real. And I don't believe in it, or well, that's just something that's made up, or whatever it is
mm,
that people think, or well, dreams don't have any meaning, or I'm in control of myself, and all of those are actually delusional.
mm,
And it seems to me that one of the things which is really important is to teach people to appreciate their own unconscious and to have a relationship with it.
mm,
This is another part of your being which has not a mind of its own, but it has a whole different perspective
mm,
on everything
mm.
and is communicating with you in ways which you ignore most of the time.
But you could say that helping people differentiate between parts and know what their central headquarters part is, then they can sometimes see how the inner critic is functioning or
Mm.
how there's been a regression because of a triggering into an early infantile rage, or that there's a way to have more compassion by knowing that those different unconscious zones will take us by surprise, and they will also construct events in our lives that if we have no awareness, then we'll just go around another loop of
Mhm.
those kind of tendencies and their consequences.
But that does bring up a whole other thing. It's not just the unconscious that you want to have a relationship with, but all the different aspects of yourself.
Mm,
You get to that sense of integration of like, well, sometimes I'm like this, sometimes I'm like that. Sometimes,
mm,
I'm in a rage, and when I'm in a rage, I'm not actually in
mm,
control of myself. Some other part of me, and I'm kind of interested in the way in which like parts work and Jung's idea of complexes and
mm,
schema therapy and all of these different ways of seeing the different aspects of ourselves.
mm.
Of course, they call every part with a different name. I mean, it's all got different names, different terminology, and they kind of colonize particular techniques to work with.
Mm.
But you're looking at the same thing always.
In relation to parts work, I think we can utilize that theory in a way that there are too many parts. It's a kind of pathologizing aspects of the self. It's almost better to kind of more generally look at some central kind of aspects like the inner critic or the saboteur or the little child who comes a cropper in there somewhere again and again and feels really badly.
Hmm.
Fairbairn's work was like that. Anyway, he had the central self and then the inner critic, the splitting that was inner critic, saboteur, and the little person, the little child who, was at the mercy of all those other, the
Right.
saboteur
Well,
and
I kind of like TA, transaction analysis, even though it's now completely out of fashion, and Eric Berne was pretty brilliant in his own way.
mm,
The problem is it got very popularized and it became, I suppose, not simplified, but turned into something very banal. But
mm,
do you remember transactional analysis where
yeah.
you
It's
know,
very
you,
alive. It's still very alive over here.
is it?
And in Europe too, I think it's still very
Yeah.
much taught as a psychotherapy training.
Yeah, because I worked with Petrushka Clarkson, she was my supervisor, and she wrote
Mm,
a number of books on, transaction analysis and Gestalt,
mm,
all those kind of things. But the idea that you just basically break it down where you've got the adult self, you've got the parent self, and you've got the
mm,
child self, and you've got the adult self is separated into
mm,
nurturing and critical, and
mm,
the other one is adapted and free. And
mm,
actually, it's a very simple but quite useful kind of
mm,
model where you're
mm,
looking at the different parts, where you're trying to get at least the adult self, the ego, basically,
mm,
to modulate and modify some
mm,
of these internal relationships which
mm.
are not working very well.
You could say Freud's model of id, ego, and superego is a bit like that too.
It was very like that, and that's obviously where he got it from.
Yeah.
So back to
Yeah.
the idea of appreciation. Are we
Mm.
appreciating the person, aspects of the person, the struggle that they have, their life history? And how do we convey that appreciation? I mean, I like the idea that you wrote an appreciative kind of missile, basically, to them
Mm.
after the session. You didn't keep them, did you?
They were like, instead of me recording a session, it was me recording it in a way that the client had access to, the my reflections on what we were working on, but also a bigger appreciation of them as a whole person. Yeah, there's something there in terms of the people's true nature, their pure potentiality,
Okay, right.
the that to appreciate how that's working, how that's stuck and but also looking for something. I've had people who've been very aggressive. Their stuckness, their very rigid personality constructs of their addictions, make it very hard for them to believe in life outside those patterns because they're so anchored in them, and the addiction is profound. When you hold a sense of that potentiality for them, and also see, how there was a journey there, how they got into that, how they've kind of what they've got out of it, because often they will get something out of it,
Hmm.
and what's the next step in terms of how they can live without that or live with it differently so that it doesn't impinge so much on their life and relationships. And that's a very, very powerful a form of appreciation of that journey, how of what their childhood, what their life was like before, this happened. and how then what the road into that, it could be through peer group, could be through, school connections, it could be through bullying, a reaction to bullying, but it's about appreciating that people don't want fundamentally to have be in the grip of that kind of addiction or that kind of tendency. And when we hold that assumption that they fundamentally don't want to, but it's a very powerful demon force that's got hold of them. And in some ways, you could say externalizing that a bit helps to kind of make it a force that they're wrestling with as opposed to who they are.
Okay, let's do a little final appreciation of our
Mm,
appreciation. Just as an experience, I believe that appreciation is a mindset. It's an
mm,
intention that you set for yourself. It's a discipline that it actually, like all things, you can create an appreciative mindset which becomes more habitual almost.
mm,
And that appreciation leads to happiness. It's actually much nicer. Now you could say, well, there's a kind of self-delusion to it, and it's okay. But self-delusion, if it's in service of happiness, I'm actually kind of in favor
mm.
of that. So I like that. And the other thing is appreciation does lead to a level of tolerance. And without tolerance, human beings just cannot live with each other. It's
Mm.
it's the foundation of how we have to get on with things. We need to be tolerant. We have to be tolerant of ourselves and we have to be tolerant of everybody else. Otherwise,
Mm.
it just gets worse and worse. But it's a hard discipline.
It is a hard discipline. There's something about work that we have to constantly keep doing on ourselves, and the work we do. In some ways, we've been privileged to have therapy and to have confidential space, with people who are in some ways more developed than ourselves in different ways, and to have opportunities to study and to learn, some very interesting and helpful tools to be able to reflect on ourselves, but also understand things more deeply and profoundly. And to know that, we're on a constant journey of, I like Wilbur's terms of wake up, grow up, clean up, show up, and that's a never-ending life process. And so, yeah, I mean, I appreciate how we ourselves are part of that. And sometimes I think even in being sharing something about myself in terms of my imperfections or what I've been through with a client, by sharing some of those things, then it's almost like uh, putting us on the same level instead of me, seeming to be beyond some of those sufferings when I'm not, and I haven't been. And
Mm,
I've been through my own hell realms and relationship issues and developmental struggles. And sometimes when I can share some of that, it helps people kind of feel, almost like they're more human themselves because I'm human. So I appreciate my own suffering, I think, my own
mm.
history and the history of my ancestors.
I actually think that it's very important to appreciate our own life journey because it is a journey. Okay, John.
Thank you, Roland.